A light in the basement that shouldn't be there. A shelf no one can agree existed. A single name on a spine that finds its way back into the stacks. Tonight, the library keeps a small secret and remembers it in the dark. Hey, glad you're here. I keep the lamp low, steady detail. Before we start, do our 3 soft checks with me. Slow breath in, loosen your jaw, thumb on the table, click the quiet key. Drop your city and local time in the comments, and add what you're listening on so our little night map can circle the world. New calm history. Horror arrives most nights. If this keeps you company, wait until the video ends to subscribe, then tap the bell so the next file finds you. After, tell me what details stayed with you. The library had always kept its own kind of quiet. It was the sort of quiet that wore shoes on the carpet and spoke in commas, the hush you could feel settling between the shelves, as if the books themselves had learned to breathe slowly. The building was older than the town's high school and newer than the oldest church. It knew the names of people who came every Tuesday for knitting, and it knew the angle of light through the reading room windows when autumn made the air taste like pressed leaves. Tom had worked there longer than most of the volunteers had been alive. He scrubbed floors, fixed the jammed copy machine, and moved boxes of donated paperbacks that smelled faintly of other houses. He knew where the lost library cards often turned up, between the cushions of the story corner sofa, inside the piano lid, always under the same middle row of the non-fiction shelf. He knew the furnace rattles in winter, and which fluorescent tube flickered at the east end on stormy afternoons. He knew the building's polite, small griefs, because he had watched them happen with the patient, absent-minded care of someone who works at night when no one notices. On an October evening, the emergency lights blinked during a routine drill. The head librarian, Ms. Carrow, had organized it, an alarm test to remind the staff of the evacuation procedures. The reading room lights dimmed, then popped back. Patrons shrugged and shifted in their chairs. Tom did his rounds to check fire doors and unplug the stray kettles. He took the stairwell down to the basement because the drill meant the basement would be lit on a different circuit. In the old building, those circuits like to surprise you. Basements have a voice of their own. Concrete speaks in a low, distant echo. Pipes speak in soft, metallic sighs. Tom lit his small torch and moved slowly, bumping a mop handle against a stack of boxes to keep the sound from startling him. He had walked these floors fixing heaters and sweeping shelves for years. He expected to find the usual things: a misplaced atlas, a cruelty-free detergent sample, someone's shoebox of childhood report cards. He did not expect a shelf where there should have been nothing. It was narrow, set into a shallow alcove like a memory carved into the concrete. The boards were older than the rest of the basement furniture and had been sanded to a soft grey. On the spines of the books, if they could be called books, there were not titles or call numbers. There were only names, one per spine. Some names were common, some were as small and unfamiliar as seeds. The ink on the labels had the faint sheen of handwriting that was careful because it had time, or because it wanted to be noticed by someone who would bend low and read slowly. Tom reached out and pulled one volume free. The paper inside was thin and smelled like dust warmed by old sunlight. He expected something: notes, scribbles, a library stamp. Instead, the pages were blank, except for a single neat line, written in small deliberate script. He remembers where I left the light. The sentence sat alone in an ocean of white paper and felt, to Tom, like a punctuation placed where people usually put the memory. He laughed once, low and surprised. Maybe someone had made an art piece and dropped it down in a box with the donations. Maybe a prankster thought the library needed more mystery to entertain the weekly book club. Tom put the volume back and stared at the wall. In his torch's circle, the plaster seemed to ripple. He told himself he had been looking for things and sometimes saw them where they were not. He closed the basement door and went home. The next morning, he told Ms. Carrow in the soft way that only people who work closely with one another share, as if repeating a recipe. She smiled the way librarians smile at eccentric patrons, kind, slightly removed. She took his arm and led him down 2 bright stairwell lights, counting the cinder blocks like someone following a pattern. Where Tom had seen the alcove, there was only an expanse of concrete, pale and unmarked, the kind of blank wall that only a building with a history can wear without apology. "Maybe you remembered wrong," she said, as if a missing shelf could be an object of forgetfulness rather than mischief. Tom became careful. He avoided the basement when the day staff were gone. He left his cigarettes in the trunk and kept the flashlight in the cleaning closet. If anyone asked about the box of unmarked books that occasionally arrived in the donation bin, he shrugged and said they would be sorted on Tuesday. It is odd how the mind softens when it wants people to stop asking. The story sank into the background like a seed, waiting. The book, however, seemed determined. Weeks later, a plain cloth volume appeared on the main circulation desk. It had no barcode, no publisher's sticker, nothing to tie it to the catalogue. On its spine was Tom's name, small, centered, as if printed by someone who had known how to make ink comfortable where a name might be seen. The librarian did not put it in returns. She put it under the week's new pile to see if anyone would claim it. When she opened it, just a page, a single sentence stared back in the old, careful script. "He remembers where I left the light." She thought of Tom and of the basement, and of the way buildings sometimes keep small things for people who work in them. She thought of how the library had once been a private house, then a school, then a place with a stair in which a child had once dropped a coin and cried until someone found it. Memory nests in the places people pass through. Tom's evenings changed. He put a small lamp by his bedside and slept with it on sometimes, the soft, steady glow a reassurance. He began to leave certain books alone on shelves where they would not be fingered by impatient hands. When patrons asked for obscure local histories, he pointed them toward the reading room rather than the basement. He kept saying the same phrase to himself until it sounded like a prayer. Not everything should be taken down. People notice tiny things more often than you would think. Volunteers began to find anonymous lists in the lost and found box. A sweater that had no owner suddenly sat folded in the periodicals section. On Halloween, when the library opened late for children's stories, they lit battery candles and sang the old songs as if rituals could steady the nerves of the town. That year, as mothers zipped tiny capes and fathers pretended they had no preference about which seat to choose, someone found a single unmarked volume on the circulation desk. No one claimed it. The name on its spine was small. It was older than the town's new street names. It felt like a name from the era of coal and print. Ms. Carrow placed the book in the return bin, hesitant, the way one might place a letter in a mailbox whose owner has moved away. She circled back at closing to pick it up, and for a moment let her fingers drag across the cover. It had a warmth, barely there, like a hand left on a page. Tom retired the following spring. He bought a small house on the edge of town with a porch and a mailbox he never forgot to check. The new janitor talked in practical terms about mold and permits and the best brand of floor wax. He complained that the basement door stuck sometimes. He swore he felt a draft that came from under the concrete, but said nothing about names on spines. Perhaps there are things only some people are meant to notice, like little cracks where memory slips through. If you ask the staff now, they will tell you differently depending on the day. They will tell you that the basement is filled with boxes of donations and old puppets. and an extra copy machine, but on certain nights in October when the rain is slow and even and the fluorescent lights hum in that particular way, someone walking by the circulation desk will say they saw a book with no barcode sitting face down, and when they lifted it, a page told them only, "He remembers where I left the light." It is not a loud story. It does not demand the heart. It sits like dust on the windowsill and waits for a light to come through. If you walk past the library on a late autumn evening, you might notice the basement window, a small square of glass, a faint circle of light, a place where someone has left a lamp in case the stairs get dark. It is a small courtesy. Buildings keep small things for those who cared enough to walk their halls at night. Sometimes it is a book. Sometimes it is a single sentence, printed for a person who knows how to read between the lines. If you ever find a book with only a name on its spine, leave it where it is. Close the cover. Let the building keep its light. The quiet in there remembers what we try to forget. And it can be kinder to hold on to such things for a little while longer. Tom's retirement should have closed the story like a book left on a shelf. He expected the quiet life of early morning newspapers and a porch that creaked in a friendly way. Instead, the little returns pile at the library kept reminding him of the place he had left behind. It started small. A postcard with no return address slipped under his gate. It showed the town from an old photograph, rows of hedges, the library roof visible over a row of elms, and on the back, in the same careful script, only a single line. The light is still set. He folded the card and put it in his drawer. He told himself the postcard had fallen out of a box of donations, or that a former patron had remembered him and wanted to say thank you. The feeling that followed was not gratitude. It was like the hush that falls in a room after a sentence has been read aloud and everyone realizes something was left unsaid. A volunteer who had taken Tom's old shift called him one Friday with a voice that trembled more from curiosity than fear. "We found another book," she said. "Same as before. It was on the table when I came in. I thought maybe someone left it for cataloguing, but Ms. Carrow swears it wasn't here last night." Tom listened to the soft clink of a mug over the line and the low murmur of a radio. He felt, absurdly, like a man who had been invited back to an event he had already left. When she described the volume, Tom closed his eyes. The spine, she said, bore a name, one he hadn't expected to see again. It was the name of a woman who had come to Story Hour every Tuesday with her grandson. She had died earlier that year. Tom remembered her laugh like a bookmark. He remembered the way she tucked her scarf to her chin in winter. Her name on the spine did not feel like a label so much as an address. They brought the book to the staff room and set it on the table between a stack of overdue notices and a dish of mints. Ms. Carrow opened the cover with the same calm she used when she shelved donated Bibles. The single sentence on the first page read as it had before. "He remembers where I left the light." Below it, in a smaller hand, a second sentence had been added. "I leave it for the people who read at night." Everyone around the table felt the same small thing, an awkwardness that was more like respect. They did not want to touch the ways the town kept its memories. Ms. Carrow closed the book and said quietly, "We'll put it in special collections." She said it as if there were a form to fill and a drawer to slide closed. The staff left it wrapped in brown paper on the high shelf between the local history pamphlets and the ledger of donated chairs. People began to tell stories about their own brushes with small, inconvenient wonders, an umbrella that moved from the umbrella stand to the front desk and back again, a knitted scarf that would appear on the stroller of someone who had seemed to be carrying nothing, exactly when the rain started. A child whose parents were divorced swore a copy of her favourite picture book was waiting on the small table near the window the evening she could not go home. Nothing violent happened, nothing shouted for attention. The library kept giving back what it had taken in ways like a houseplant, offering a single new leaf. One winter, when the town's electric department was replacing the streetlights, a lineman stopped by the library to use the restroom. He came out pale and ruffled, his gloves still on. "There's a wire under that basement floor," he told Tom, whom he found sweeping leaves from his porch. Tom asked where. The lineman pointed at the library's roof, the way a man might point at an old oak tree. "Not where you'd expect. It's like the building remembers a service that's long since been cut." He shrugged and said the city would come and inspect. The city came and found only standard wiring, nothing illicit and nothing dangerous. They left notes with stamped dates and polite signatures. There were rumours, as there always are, about why the library kept certain things. An old tenant had once lived in the building, when it had been a private home. He buried a nightlight in the garden to guide someone he loved home. A long ago librarian, some said a young woman who had worked late and read aloud to soldiers, liked to leave lamps burning on the stairs. None of these stories could be proven. They fit like puzzle pieces that had been cut for another box, years folded into each other. The town changed its mayor and its bus routes. Teenagers who had once hung out under the elm trees left for college and sent back photographs that showed distant skylines and signs with unfamiliar names. Still, once in a while, a book without a barcode would appear where it did not belong. Sometimes the name on the spine was of someone who had recently been buried. Sometimes it was a name that nobody could remember hearing before. Each book arrived with a single printed line on the first page and the same small, inevitable patience. Tom found himself walking past the library on purpose sometimes, as if the building were an old neighbour he did not want to disappoint. He would pause at the window when the light was low and watch the circulation desk like someone reading the first page of a book. Once, on a rain-slim evening, he saw Ms. Carrow place a wrapped volume in the returns slot and then step back as if she had put something sacred on a table. She closed her eyes for a beat and then locked up, the click of the door behind her loud in the empty street. A bird quieted in the elm above him. Tom felt, with the simple logic of a man who remembers the small cruelties and mercies of buildings, that the library was matching its keeping with paying back. Toward the end, there was a moment that felt like an answer without being an explanation. A new shelving unit arrived, metal, efficient, bought with a grant for reorganizing the archive. The staff assembled it with the same kind of cheerful order that the town used at its clean-up days. On the unit's lowest shelf, hidden behind a box of microfilm, someone found a loose floorboard. Under it were small things, a bundle of letters tied with twine, a small night lamp with a chipped blue base, and a single ledger page with the names of people who had once worked late inventorying donations. The handwriting matched the careful script of the book pages. No thunderclap followed. The discoveries slid into the archive like small, neat ships. Ms. Carrow wrote a note in the ledger, found beneath floorboard during shelving. She dated it. She placed the note in a folder labelled Local Memories. The town council approved nothing and approved everything by not worrying too hard. Life went on. As for Tom, he kept his lamp on for a while after the boxes were found, and then he did not. He sometimes dreamed of the basement not as a dark place with a hidden shelf, but as a room with a single lamp on a table and someone sitting there finishing a sentence. He imagined the person turning a page, smiling at the exactness of the punctuation, and setting the lamp down for another to find. The books that returned names also stopped slowly, as if they'd decided a ledger had been satisfied. There were years when none appeared at all. In those years, the town's children grew and learned the feel of the library and less of its small mysteries. But every so often, on a night when the wind came in from the river and the streetlights drew old, long shadows across the sidewalk, someone would find a book on the circulation desk. They would open it with reverent fingers and read the single sentence on the first page. It never promised anything dramatic. It never asked for a bargain. It simply seemed to hold an agreement between a building and the people who had learned to care for its light. He remembers where I left the light. It is a sentence like a folded map, useful only if you know where the roads begin. It asks nothing more than that somebody else be willing to hold on to the lamp for a while longer. Tom lived long enough to know that some things are kinder when they are kept. He died with the porch light next to his armchair. The town buried him on a calm day and read his name in the paper. Ms. Carrow kept a copy of the ledger page in a drawer where she sometimes pulled it out and smoothed it with her hand. New volunteers learned to smile at the stories the way one smiles at weather, inevitable and mildly interesting. If you go to that library now and you stay until the evening, when the building breathes the slow breath of closing hours, you might see a single square of light in the basement window. It is small, pale, the same lamp that might have existed for decades. If you watch long enough, someone will lock up and turn away. The light will stay. The building will keep its small things. And then when you least expect it, a book might appear on the desk with a name on its spine that makes you look twice because you realize it is someone you love. You will close the book gently and you will leave it where it is. The library keeps its own careful watch. It remembers the people who leave lamps on and the ones who read in the small hours. It does not call attention to itself. It simply keeps quietly and well the things that cannot be explained away. The town measured its small mercies in practical things: clean sidewalks, a working furnace, a librarian who remembered everyone's birthdays. But in the months after Tom left, the library's quiet seemed to thicken, as if the building had folded a new layer of attention over its rooms. The wrapped volumes in special collections sat like patient animals on a shelf, and volunteers who worked late began to feel a new propriety about which lights to leave on and which corners to avoid. It was Ms. Carrow who noticed the pattern. She had a way of cataloguing more than books, habits, small cadences, who shelved biographies by author's first name, which patron always asked for the same old history of the town. One slow Tuesday, while she was rearranging donations, she found a slip of paper tucked into the spine of a pamphlet about regional architecture. It was not any of the ordinary notes staff left for one another, no call numbers, no acquisition requests. The paper bore a single, neat sentence in a hand she had seen before, the hand that had written the lines that kept reappearing. He remembers where I left the light. She did not tell anyone at once. Some discoveries are too private to parade. Some small mysteries are better kept folded. She slid the slip into her pocket and finished shelving books in silence. Days later, another volunteer found a cloth-bound volume on the return cart. The spine held a name, someone who had donated quilts and told stories at the knitting circle, a woman whose stooped posture had been a fixture for years. When Ms. Carrow opened that book, a second line had been added beneath the familiar sentence. We keep it until someone sits with it. The phrase lodged in her chest like a seed. Who was he? Who left the light? And who kept it lit, across seasons and through staffing changes? She began to move differently through the building, watching the way the light fell across the circulation desk, counting the hours the basement window glowed with that pale orange, even when the municipal power had been off for the better part of a storm. Rumours in small towns grow like vines. They circle a post and climb. The story of the shelf spread in soft, careful sentences, told to neighbours over tea and repeated in the bakery between the baguettes. A retired school teacher mentioned, almost as an aside, that when she had been a child, there had been a house there once. An old woman lived in the back rooms and used to leave a nightlight by her door. Kept her husband's lamp lit, the teacher said she didn't want the dark to have any more than it needed. The image fit neatly with the books that kept appearing. Someone holding a light like a promise. Tom heard about the rumours in the way old friends do through the mail, in passing comments from people he had known for years. A postcard with the town skyline had arrived at his porch the week after he retired. He set it on his kitchen table and read the single line on the back twice before folding it and putting it away. He felt a tug at the chest he could not name, equal parts curiosity and obligation. The lamp beside his armchair had been a comfort. Now it felt like a thread leading back to a place he had tended for decades. On a wet spring morning, the building inspector called the library about a sinkhole discovered under a nearby walkway. They planned to do some excavation to shore up the foundations. Ms. Carrow, pragmatic as ever, prepared for the inconvenience. She locked the restricted stacks and put up signs. Most of the volunteers accepted the disruption like seasonal weather, an annoyance fixed by the city with the right budget line. The crew did not find a sinkhole. They found a loose floorboard in the old basement, one that had been overlooked in inspections for years because it fit so neatly you had to be looking for it. Beneath the board lay a small, shallow cavity carved in the concrete. Someone had taken pains to make it perfectly square. Inside were objects that had the provenance of memory more than of treasure. A child's marble, a length of frayed ribbon, an old brass key dulled by time, and, folded carefully in waxed paper, the first fragile page of a ledger. The handwriting across that page matched the careful script the staff had grown to recognize. On it, beneath the familiar sentence, someone had written a longer line, this time in a hand steadier and older. For those who keep the nights, keep the light, and they will find the book. No one had written an explanation. No one filed a claim. The city inspector annotated the report with a single, disinterested sentence, found objects, transferred to archive, and the folder was marked and shelved. But Ms. Carrow read the ledger page for herself, smoothing the paper with fingers that trembled a little, and felt something that was not catalogued in any administrative manual, the layered kindness of a place that had chosen to keep memory not as weight but as vigil. What the ledger suggested was not a ghost story of the kind that shouted in the night. It was a maintenance of attention. Someone, people over time, had been gathering objects, leaving notes, folding small pages into pockets beneath floorboards and in the hollow backs of chairs. They were keeping watch in a human, domestic way, repairing, tucking, leaving a light burning for anyone who might come home late. The books with names on their spines were not simply labels, they were residencies. Each volume marked a person the building refused to let slip entirely from its shelves. People started to understand that the library's acts were reciprocal. It kept what it was given and, in return, offered what it could, a place, a title, a gentle forgetting until someone needed to remember. When a patron lost a ring, she found it in the local history file. When a child could not sleep, she would find a picture book waiting on the reading rug the next evening, face out and warm from the light. The building did not demand offerings in the mythic sense. It simply accepted the small, habitual care of people who wanted to be tended. Not everyone agreed this was comforting. A few long-timers who had boredom's bluntness saw it as superstition grown useful. They called the occurrences coincidence and liked the tidy finality of probability. But more often the explanation people favoured was softer. The town kept its own mercies, and the library was a place practised in the language of keeping. For Tom, the discovery under the floorboard became a kind of summons. He had always thought that his work, sweeping, fixing, finding, had been small and unimportant, the quotidian labour that keeps an institution breathing. The ledger's line felt like an answer to that thought. One evening in late autumn he found himself on the library steps again, the keys to his old locker a weight in his pocket. He went inside without knocking. Miss Carrow, surprised but not unwelcoming, let him in and handed him the old janitor's broom. He took it like a man picking up a familiar tool and walked the silent aisles. The basement light was not where it had been, not exactly. Tiles had been laid, concrete had been poured, the city had certified the repairs. But beneath the thin rectangle of a basement window, a small glow seeped through the cracks, an orange like embers, kept just near life. Tom stood with his hand on the mop handle and smiled a little, as if greeting an old friend. He spent the evening moving boxes, carrying the books that had been found into a small cabinet he had reclaimed to be his own. He wiped dust from spines with a reverence he had not allowed himself in years. People noticed. The volunteers who worked late found that the unnamed volumes seemed less foreign than before. A woman who had once received a book with her grandmother's notes inside returned to the library crying to thank whoever had looked after the volume. A teenager who had once sneaked in to read after closing hours left a folded note on Tom's mop bucket. Thanks. His light helped. The notes accumulated, not as proof, but as conversation. The ledger had asked that someone keep the light. The town had obliged. There were still oddities. A stack of interlibrary loan slips appeared interleaved with an atlas from another state, stamped with a date from decades prior. A donated postcard arrived with no return address and a single line. Do not put the lamp out. These little anomalies had the tenderness of someone insisting on a habit. Keep the light, keep the thing that helps others find what they lost. When Tom died, in the soft, slow way of his generation, the town mourned him as if for the man who had always been there to set a kettle on the library's stove and fix a loose hinge. At his funeral, a woman from the knitting circle stood and told a story about a lamp that had once been left on his porch because she had known he liked to read until the streetlights went blind. She spoke about how he kept small things tidy and how he always left a light burning when he thought someone might come home late, because he had once been alone and wanted, in the end, to make sure no one else was. After his funeral, a parcel arrived at the library. Miss Carrow opened it with the same hands that had smoothed the ledger page. Inside was a small lamp, its glass a little clouded with age, and a note in Tom's cramped script, "Keep the lamp, for the ones who remember at night." She put the lamp on the circulation desk, and when that evening came and the volunteers were closing, one of them noticed an unmarked book placed gently beside it. No barcode, no call number. On the spine, Tom's name. That night, the staff read the book by the lamplight. Its pages were blank, save for one line written in the familiar, careful script. He remembered where I left the light. Thank you for keeping it. It was the simplest gratitude anyone could offer. A sentence that required nothing more from the living than attention, a willingness to care. As years stretched on, the shelf in the basement stopped being a secret. It became a small, unofficial archive of care. Names appeared and seemed to dissolve away according to the rhythms of the town. Births, deaths, moves, quiet recoveries. People came to the library not only for information, but to leave a note with the staff. A lost button, a photograph, a shoelace. Sometimes the objects were trivial. Sometimes they mattered. A ring, a set of keys, a letter that had been mislaid for decades. The library accepted them, and in its peculiar way, returned them when they were needed. There were nights when the glow under the window was the only bright thing on the street. It looked less supernatural than domestic. like a kettle left on, like a bedside lamp guarding a sleeping house. Passers-by would glance at the library and feel the same uncomplicated comfort that comes from seeing a light in a window of an otherwise dark house. The town told itself this was how communities worked. People kept watch for one another. Not every mystery had an explanation. A book would appear with a name no one recognized. Sometimes a visitor from the city confessed to having dreamed of a lamp that guided them home, only to find a volume with their own name waiting on the desk weeks later. Those occurrences were the smallest, strangest things, enough to keep the town's stories alive, but never enough to demand answers. On certain October evenings, if you walked past the library after closing and paused just long enough to look through the basement window, you could see a square of amber that refused to be swallowed by the night. Someone, perhaps the staff, perhaps a volunteer with a key, perhaps the building itself, took care to keep a light where the foundation met the earth. It was not a dramatic beacon. It did not call or judge. It simply glowed, a steady pulse beneath the floorboards, like a heartbeat beneath a sleeping body. If you were the sort to linger, you might notice, tucked beside the return slot, a slim, unmarked volume waiting to be shelved. You could open it and find only one small line on the first page. He remembers where I left the light. You could close it gently and leave it where it is. No need to take it home, no need to fix it, no need to prove anything to anyone. The book would be there the next week, or perhaps replaced by another with a different name, another small sentence, another folded scrap. That is how the library kept its watch, not with loud proclamations, but with the steady private maintenance of many small acts. Lamps left lit, ledgers slipped beneath loose boards, books returned to hands that needed them. The building remembered in its way, patient and domestic, and the town answered in kind. They kept the light for one another, a chain of small gentlenesses stitched together over time, and sometimes, when the night was very still and the wind held its breath, someone walking past the library would think they saw, for a heartbeat, the shape of a man by the circulation desk, broom in hand, smiling as if to say the work had been done and passed on. The sight would be gone by the next blink, leaving only the lamp's steady glow and a town that kept a light burning in case someone needed it. If you ever find a book with a name on its spine and a single line inside, put it back where you found it. Let the building keep its small mercies. Some places remember us better than we remember ourselves, and sometimes the kindest thing is to let them hold on. The ledger on Ms. Carrow's desk grew heavier with each passing autumn. Names threaded into its columns like stitches in a patchwork quilt. Some faded, some new, some repeated, as if someone remembered to check them twice. People came and went. The town's life rearranged itself around jobs and mortgages and birthdays. But the library's small care remained steady, a habit practiced by enough hands that it became less strange and more like ritual. One evening, late and rain softened, a woman from out of town pushed open the library's heavy doors. She carried a suitcase and an air of someone who had been travelling for a long time. She spoke quietly to Ms. Carrow when she explained why she was there. She had been trying to find a book that had been important to her as a child, a thin volume illustrated in a way she could no longer quite recall. The book had vanished when she left town years ago. She had dreamed of it, and of a lamp that burned in a window she couldn't place. Now here she was, on impulse, following the tug of a memory. They searched the shelves together. The woman's fingers trembled as they flipped through paperbacks and pamphlets, and when Ms. Carrow lifted a cloth-bound volume from the special collections cabinet, the traveller let out a small, startled sound. On the spine, in a hand that had become familiar to the staff, was the woman's name. She opened the book with hands that were suddenly small and careful, and there, on the first page, the single sentence she had come to find. He remembers where I left the light. She sat at the reading table and did not speak for a long time. Outside, the rain stitched the pavement into a soft, even sheet. The lamp on the circulation desk threw a pool of amber across the floor. The traveller told Miss Carrow about the book, about how it had kept her when she was a child, how its pictures had been a refuge during a season when there was not much refuge in her life. She said that she had always believed someone must have kept it safe, and that, in the dream where she saw the lamp, it felt like someone was watching over her without asking anything in return. Miss Carrow listened, and then, without pretense, she closed the book and placed it on the desk. "Leave it a while," she said. "Take it down in the mornings when the town is still quiet. There's a chair by the window where the light reaches the pages better." She did not mention the loose floorboard or the ledger or the lamp Tom had left. Those were details a place kept between itself and its caretakers. Word of the returned book spread slowly, as towns' stories do. People who had once thought the odd sentences and anonymous volumes were quaint superstition began to treat them like small errands of compassion. A retired teacher called to ask if there was a book for a child who had trouble sleeping. A teenager brought in a dog-eared comic he wanted preserved. A family dropped off a shoebox of letters they'd found when clearing out an attic. Each object was catalogued differently now, sometimes plainly, sometimes in the softer ledger language, held until found. The library became, in the truest way, a place to leave things for later retrieval, a way the town stored its practical mercies. But the building's keeping was not only transactional, its memories sometimes reached back with a quiet insistence, nudging people towards small acts of care. One winter night, when cold had made the pavement glassy and thin, the heating system hiccuped and failed. Volunteers worked with space heaters and blankets, and the kind of small seriousness people bring to things they love. During the outage, someone noticed the basement window, a thin amber line showing where the lamp's glow crept beneath the tiles. Nobody could say why the light had returned that evening, any more than they could explain why a particular book had reappeared after a decade. They simply accepted it as part of the library's fabric, the building's way of answering people who still bothered to look for what was lost. Time, patient and inevitable, carried the ledger forward. Names that had sat like dots on the page were crossed with dates and notes, marriages, moves, deaths. The shelf under the basement that once seemed to appear and then vanish became less a riddle than a habit. People left things there with the same quiet faith they might tuck a note into another's hand, trusting that someone would hold it for them and give it back when the moment came. Sometimes the library's memory puzzled even its caretakers. A college student visiting for a weekend checked the local shelves for a thesis he had written years before and found a slim volume with his own name on the spine. Inside, a single sentence read, "He remembers where I left the light." He had no recollection of ever leaving the book, and yet he carried it out, grateful and disoriented as if rescued from some small, polite undoing. On other nights, there were things that felt like good luck, the sort that is quietly earned. A mother who could not find the photo album from her wedding discovered it in a box labelled "Local History," wrapped in tissue. When she opened it, a note fell out. "Kept warm. For return." She sat in a corner with her thumb tracing the worn cover while Miss Carrow went about her closing routine. Both of them understood, wordlessly, that the library's acts of keeping were less about memory than about making room for people to find what steadied them. There were also subtler payments. Teenagers who had once mocked the ledger's oddities began to leave backdoor gifts. A bag of candies on the return cart on Halloween, a freshly baked pie tucked behind a stack of periodicals. The gesture was playful, a mimicry of the older kindnesses, but it mattered. It kept the rhythm alive. It was, perhaps, how a town remembers to be kind to itself. The building changed in small ways. The city approved repairs and grants and new shelving. The library installed fibre-optic internet and a tiny cafe area for students. Yet beneath the institutional updates, some practices endured. The lamp returned from time to time to its place under the basement window. Volunteers still checked the ledger and slipped notes into the special collections cabinet. People still found their small treasures restored, more often than chance would allow. In the years that followed, the story of the lamp and the ledger softened into town lore. It was the kind of story told at community suppers and in the prayerful hush of funeral repasts. It was not flashy. It held no headline. But it did something less showy and more necessary. It taught a small community how to keep. The library, humble, ordinary, stubbornly useful, became a place where people learned the art of attending, the small practices that over time knit strangers into a network of responsibility. Once, when the autumn light turned thin and the trees were almost bare, a child left a folded note on the circulation desk. It was scrawled in a child's careful hand and read simply, "If someone needs this lamp, maybe they need it, like I needed my bear." Miss Carrow smiled, as if the sentence had inflamed a memory inside the building and made it beat a little warmer. She tucked the note into the ledger, where it would rest beside many other small sentences of thanks and request. There are places that insist on being noticed. The library, with its creaks and its warm lamps and its ledger of names, was one of them. It did not require belief. It required a tendency. People needed to pay attention, to tuck away, to hold on long enough for another person to find what they had left. It was a cooperative vigilance practiced by a town of ordinary hands. If you pass that library on a November night and you pause at the basement window, you might still see a faint glow. It will not blind you. It will not announce itself as miracle. It will be domestic and steady, one small point of light beneath the floorboards, an ember kept for the ones who arrive late. If you are the sort who lingers, look for the unmarked volume by the returns. Open it, and you will find, on the first page, the same careful line. He remembers where I left the light. Close the book gently and put it back. Leave the lamp where it is. Some mercies are best kept in common, small, practical, patient. Let the building keep its watch. Let the town keep its habit. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is to leave a light on for one another. The subway tunnels under the city are not designed to be friendly. Their concrete walls absorb sound like a low drum. Their fluorescent lights flicker in a rhythm that sometimes tricks your eyes into seeing shapes at the edge of vision. Most people pass through them in daylight, moving quickly between street and train, ears full of podcasts or music, eyes fixed forward. At night, the tunnels reveal a different life. One measured in echoes, low metallic groans, and the faint, almost imperceptible scent of history trapped in cement and steel. Marek knew the tunnels better than most. He had walked them for nearly a decade, inspecting the tracks, logging maintenance issues, noting which tiles had cracked and which stairwells needed extra attention. He knew where the rats scuttled and which ventilation grates hummed, with a tone that sounded almost like a voice if you listened long enough. He appreciated the exactness of the work, the quiet rhythm that came with being alone in the city's veins after the last passengers had gone. On a late October night, with leaves swirling on the streets above and a chill pressing down from the river, Marek made his rounds on the A-line. He carried his flashlight in one hand, the official radio clipped to his belt, the worn notebook in his pocket for notes on signals, lights, and the occasional stray pigeon that had found a nesting spot too close to the tracks. The station platforms were empty, except for the debris left by the late-night commuters. A lost glove here, a crumpled newspaper there, and the faint scent of coffee clinging to a trash bin. It was then that he heard the first whisper. It was soft, precise, and unmistakably human. The voice came from somewhere deep in the tunnel, but it carried through the concrete and tile in a way that seemed impossible. Marek stopped mid-step, listening. It was calling out a train, a departure time, a platform number, a destination. Everything about it was correct, down to the second. The voice was familiar, yet strange, neither mechanical nor recorded. It had warmth, an almost gentle insistence. 12:02 to Brookline, platform 3. Marek's hand tightened on the flashlight. He checked the radio. Dead. He listened again. 12:14 to Central, platform 2, 12:27 to West End, transfer at mid-platform. Each line came in a calm, steady tone, not hurried, not meant to frighten. But the tunnel air felt suddenly heavier, as if it had inhaled along with him. His eyes traced the tunnel walls, the shadows in the maintenance walkways, the service corridors where only staff ever ventured. No other soul was present. No engineers were logged in on the system. The speakers above had gone silent hours before. Marek moved cautiously, following the sound. He turned down a narrow corridor toward an old maintenance cabinet that had been locked for decades. Normally, it held only fuses, light bulbs, and a spare fire extinguisher, nothing remarkable. But tonight, the voice seemed to lead him there, almost like a hand guiding him along. He opened the cabinet. Inside, he found a single folded scrap of paper, yellowed at the edges and worn as though someone had handled it countless times. The handwriting was hurried but legible. "Keep the trains running. I still have to get home." Marek read it twice. He could not explain why the words felt alive, like a promise left for someone long gone. He carefully refolded the note and returned it to the cabinet. By the time he stepped back onto the platform, the voice had vanished entirely, leaving only the hum of the ventilation system and the distant rattle of an empty freight car in the far tunnel. The next night, Marek returned to the same station after the last express. The voice came again, but slightly different. This time it spoke to him directly. 12:42, transfer at Midtown. Watch your step. The words were calm, almost polite, and yet they carried the faint echo of something personal. Marek realized the voice was not just giving schedules, it was observing. It knew when people were alone, when they might stumble, when someone might miss a step or a stop. He followed the sound down the catwalks, over the tracks, past the rat-filled corners, and it led him to a second cabinet. Inside, another folded scrap. "Don't miss your stop. You'll make it." Over the coming nights, more incidents occurred. Other staff began reporting similar experiences, a voice calling a passenger's name, instructing them in a way that matched their exact route or schedule. Maintenance crews found scraps of paper tucked behind panels, sometimes typed, sometimes scrawled by hand. The notes were never threatening, they were reminders, almost like the tunnels themselves were issuing a quiet, human warning. One engineer discovered a stack of expired tickets hidden in an oilcloth behind a panel, each stamped with destinations that no longer existed. When he returned the next morning, the tickets were gone. Another staff member, checking a broken speaker system, found a handwritten note taped inside, "For the ones who ride home late." No one knew who had written these things. No cameras captured the hand that left them. Yet every night the voice returned, soft and insistent, reading schedules, calling names, warning commuters to step carefully. The city shrugged at first, explaining it as a quirk of the system, crossed circuits, an old automated recording, a prank by a late-night employee. But the pattern was undeniable. The voice was never wrong. The schedules it read were always correct, and the instructions it whispered were always followed perfectly by those who heard them. It was patient, polite, and consistent, almost as if someone, some presence, was committed to ensuring that nobody ever got lost or hurt in the tunnels. One night, Lila, a young cleaning worker, was finishing her shift at a near-empty station. The voice called her name softly, the same name her grandmother had used years ago to summon her in the yard. She froze, unsure whether to respond. Then it gave her instructions. Transfer at 7:09, keep your ticket. Shivers ran down her spine. She obeyed automatically, stepping toward the platform, following the voice's directions. The words faded as she reached the stairs. She later told co-workers she felt no fear, only an odd, quiet reassurance. Marek began piecing together the incidents. Each note, each whispered name, each schedule read aloud was a careful act of attention. The tunnels themselves had become a repository for human care, a system layered over the machinery and concrete, like the city had learned to anticipate its people's movements. It was not haunted in the conventional sense. It was something more patient, more deliberate. A network of small, protective gestures left for those who travelled after dark. The patterns became a sort of ritual for the late-night staff. They learned not to remove the scraps, not to tamper with the speakers, not to question the voice too closely. It was easier to accept it as a part of the city's personality, a secret that ran under their feet along with the trains. Engineers and cleaners, inspectors and volunteers, each became part of a silent agreement. The tunnels would guide them, and they would allow the tunnels to do so. By the next week, the phenomenon had spread across multiple stations, different voices, slightly different cadences, always patient, always giving directions or reminders. Some called passengers by name, others issued warnings about steps or escalators. No one ever saw the person leaving the notes. No one could trace the recordings. And yet the city's late-night passengers began to notice subtle things. Trains arriving on time, forgotten objects returned to bags or pockets, minor accidents avoided without explanation. Marek retired eventually, leaving the tunnels to a new generation of staff. He moved to a quiet house with a small yard, but he found he could not leave the memory behind. On some nights he would wake, convinced he heard the faint voice of a train conductor or an engineer giving someone directions, soft and clear in the distance. He would write notes in his notebook, small details of the city he had learned to observe, which lights hummed, which stairs groaned, which shadows lingered longer than they should. The tunnels themselves remained patient and deliberate. They carried the memory of every footstep, every late-night ride, every name called aloud in the quiet hours. The whispers became a small comfort, a hidden kindness folded into the city's machinery. They were reminders that someone, somewhere, had always cared enough to notice. Even now, if you ride the subway after midnight, when the crowds thin and the trains hum softly through the tunnels, you might hear a voice that is not a recording. It will speak your destination. It will warn you of a step. It may even call your name. And if you follow it carefully, you will arrive safely. Not all urban legends are frightening. Some are patient, quiet acts of human attention left in concrete and steel, waiting for someone to notice. And sometimes the tunnels themselves speak. The nights grew longer in October. The city above hummed with Halloween energy, costumes in the streets, laughter in cafes, but below the tunnels were a different world. The hum of the ventilation system seemed thicker, slower, more deliberate. The echo of footsteps grew sharper, more distinct, as if the concrete remembered every stride. Marek had retired, but the stories followed him like a soft chill. His replacement, a young inspector named Caleb, began noticing the same phenomena Marek had documented. Lights that flickered in patterned sequences, footsteps that seemed to match no one's movement, and, most unnerving of all, the voice. It started subtly. A soft intonation, almost hesitant, whispering schedules in a tone that felt personal. At first, Caleb dismissed it. Old wiring, crossed signals, a prank by night staff, but soon he noticed patterns that no system could replicate. The voice anticipated human error, telling a cleaning worker to step carefully on a slippery platform, reminding a late passenger of a transfer they had forgotten. One night, Caleb arrived early to inspect the maintenance tunnels beneath the downtown station. The corridors smelled of whetstone, old metal, and something faintly sweet he could not name. He walked past the service stairs, flashlight cutting narrow arcs through the dust. Then he heard it. A whisper, soft and deliberate. "Transfer at 217, don't cross." He froze, listening. The message was clear, precise. He checked his radio, dead. The CCTV feed showed no one. His heart thumped against the walls of his chest, a rhythm that echoed in the empty tunnels. Curiosity overtook fear. Caleb followed the voice down catwalks that were rarely used, over tracks that hummed with residual energy from the day. Every step seemed anticipated, as if the tunnels themselves were guiding him. He reached a maintenance cabinet tucked behind a service door. It was unlocked, a detail that should have been impossible. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, carefully pressed and well worn, with a single typed line. "Remember the 709 she gets off at World Trade." The language was exacting, almost obsessive, and the note seemed impossibly alive. Caleb left it in place, closing the cabinet slowly, feeling as if disturbing it would break something fragile but essential. When he turned back toward the platform, the whisper was gone. Only the low, steady thrum of the tracks remained. Over the following nights, the phenomena multiplied. Staff began to notice strange synchronicities. A late-night passenger would misplace a bag, but find it returned to them exactly where it belonged. Doors that were accidentally left open would quietly click shut. And the voice continued, sometimes reading schedules, sometimes giving instructions, sometimes calling names. A cleaner named Lila told Caleb she had been walking the corridor near the West End platform when the voice called her own name, the name her grandmother had used to call her in childhood. She paused mid-step, frozen in disbelief, but the voice continued, soft and patient. "Keep your pace. Transfer at Midtown. Don't hurry too fast." She followed its instructions unconsciously, and when she reached the platform, the words faded. She described feeling a quiet reassurance, a certainty that she was being watched not with malice, but care. Caleb began to piece the evidence together. The notes, the whispers, the timing, they all pointed to one conclusion. The subway, or something inhabiting it, had learned to anticipate human movement. It was not a ghost, not a spirit, not a haunted machine. It was something else. A patient, deliberate consciousness hidden in the concrete and steel, leaving messages, guiding passengers, protecting them in subtle ways. By mid-October, rumors spread among night shift staff. They began leaving small gestures in response, a flashlight left slightly tilted on a maintenance ledge, a bag of candy placed at a junction, a folded scrap of paper tucked back into a cabinet. They called it paying attention to the attention. The city seemed to recognize their participation, continuing the whispers, reinforcing the schedule, guiding the people below in subtle, invisible ways. One night, Caleb watched as the system extended its care in a new, almost playful way. A young man, headphones in, nearly stepped onto the tracks. The voice intervened. "Step back. Wait for the signal." The man froze, startled, looked around. No one was near. He nodded to himself, stepping back. The train arrived, doors opening perfectly. He stepped inside safely, unaware that a single, unseen entity had observed him, guided him, kept him from harm. The phenomenon did not confine itself to logic. A dispatcher checking archived feeds from the 1990s discovered an old test recording labelled Station Test, 1994. Hidden in the file was a faint voice, soft and deliberate, almost identical to the whispers the night staff now reported. In the margin of the recording, someone had written, "For the ones who ride home late." Caleb realized that the practice had existed for decades, maintained quietly, unseen. Each generation of staff had unwittingly participated in a ritual that was part urban legend, part municipal care, part something else entirely. The tunnels themselves had inherited a human habit, attentiveness, folded into steel, cement, and the hum of electric lines. As Halloween approached, the whispers became bolder. They no longer only read schedules or called names. They issued minor warnings, subtle instructions, and gentle guidance. Commuters who lingered after the last express noticed the voice guiding them through stairs, across platforms, over hazards that should have gone unnoticed. Dogs on leashes stiffened when they approached empty stations. Street-level shadows seemed to ripple in response to the tunnel's activity. Even employees who tried to rationalize the events could not explain the cumulative effect. Broken sensors remained in their boxes, cabinet locks held no clues, CCTV cameras recorded the empty corridors, yet the voice persisted, shaping human behavior without visible hands, guiding the night staff and late passengers with an unnerving, careful attention. Caleb came to a quiet understanding. The voice was not malevolent. It did not demand sacrifice or obedience. It existed as a form of urban mercy, a record of all the small ways people moved through the city late at night. Its interventions were minor, but the consequences were profound. Missed steps prevented, bags returned, schedules kept. For the city's late-night travelers, the voice became a quiet reassurance, a ghostly guide that never forced itself into the light. On the night before Halloween, Caleb stood at the edge of the platform and listened. The voice came again, soft as paper sliding across a desk. 7:14 to Brookline. Change at platform 2. Mind your step. You are safe. He closed his eyes. The words were simple, deliberate, patient. He could almost feel the city itself breathing, the tunnels alive with memory and care. The world above celebrated costumes, candy, and frights, but down here, the city whispered its own Halloween story. One of quiet guardianship, patience, and unseen attention. As the train arrived, doors sliding open with a whisper of metal, Caleb stepped aboard and noticed the shadows cast by the fluorescent lights. They seemed sharper than usual, edges defined, almost protective. He realized that, like the scraps of paper and soft warnings, the city had left a record of care in its own architecture. The tunnels remembered, anticipated, and guided long after the last human had left. And in that still, humming place beneath the streets, the whispers continued, always patient, always exact, always human in their own quiet way. The nights in the tunnels had grown colder as Halloween approached. The ventilation systems hummed with a steady, almost sentient rhythm, and the concrete walls seemed to lean inward, absorbing sound and memory. The hum of the last train had faded hours ago, leaving only the drip of condensation and the faint scrape of a rat's claws. Caleb walked the East End platform, flashlight in hand, notebook tucked under his arm. He had begun noting every anomaly, every whisper, every folded scrap of paper, every subtle movement of air that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The city had begun to feel alive to him in ways he could not explain. Not haunted in the usual sense, but aware. It began with a whisper calling his name. "Caleb!" Transfer at 11:42. Step carefully. The voice was close, almost intimate, yet emanating from the empty tunnel. Caleb's breath hitched. He followed, half curious, half wary, down the maintenance catwalks that twisted over the tracks like a forgotten bridge. Shadows lengthened in the flashlight's beam, moving ahead of him in impossible patterns. Then came the first incident. A passenger, young, headphones in, absorbed in their phone, stepped backward toward the edge of the platform. The whisper was sharp, insistent. "Step back! Wait for the signal!" The young person froze. Caleb watched from the shadows as the train slid into the station silently, doors opening exactly in alignment with the platform's edge. The passenger stepped inside, oblivious to who or what had intervened. The whisper faded, leaving only the low hum of the tunnel and the faint echo of rushing steel. Caleb began to realize the scale of what he was witnessing. It wasn't just schedules or minor guidance. The voice was actively protecting people. It knew where they would be, what mistakes they might make, and it intervened, softly, invisibly, always precisely. Over the next few nights, reports multiplied. Workers described hearing multiple voices, sometimes overlapping, issuing instructions that were always accurate. Notes appeared in cabinets, schedules, names, warnings, gentle admonitions. The handwriting varied, some typed, some hurriedly scrawled, some impossibly neat. It was as if the tunnels had developed their own language of care, layered over decades of human activity. Caleb spoke with Lila, the cleaning worker. She told him about a night when the voice had spoken to her by name while she walked a service corridor. "I felt calm," she said. "Like someone was watching over me, not threatening, just making sure I got home safely." Caleb nodded, understanding. "It's like the city remembers everyone who passes through, and it acts quietly, without anyone noticing. But not every encounter was reassuring. One night, a maintenance inspector named Victor followed a whisper to a small, abandoned platform. The voice guided him toward a service door he had never noticed before. Inside, he found a single pair of shoes, clean and polished, but far too small to belong to any adult. On the wall above, written in faint chalk, "Do not forget us." Victor left immediately, shaken. The shoes vanished by the next morning, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps in the empty station. The incident reminded Caleb and the night staff that the city's memory was not always kind. It could be patient, it could guide, but it could also carry the remnants of those who never returned. The whispers intensified in the final week, before Halloween. They no longer only issued warnings, they commented on patterns of behavior, offering subtle advice. "Do not rush. Check the platform edge. Your bag is safe. Pick it up before the train arrives. Look down. Step carefully." Passengers began noticing the inexplicable coincidences. Luggage returned to its owner. Misplaced tickets were discovered just in time. Commuters who lingered late noticed shadows that seemed protective, guiding them subtly away from hazards. Caleb began mapping the incidents, realizing that the tunnels had a consciousness of their own, one that had grown over decades. It was meticulous, methodical, patient. A system of care built from scraps of paper, whispers, and observation, layered over the machinery of the subway itself. And then came the night that changed everything. Caleb was inspecting the downtown junction when he heard it again, a voice soft but insistent, calling, 11:59, transfer at West End, mind the gap. He followed down a narrow catwalk, flashlights sweeping over exposed cables, water stains, and shadowed recesses. Ahead he saw a faint movement, a figure, slumped, seemingly asleep or unconscious on the tracks. His heart skipped. He rushed forward, flashlight illuminating the figure, a young woman, headphones still on, unaware she was steps from disaster. The whisper repeated, Step back, do not fall. Caleb grabbed her arm, pulling her to safety. The moment she was clear, the voice fell silent, leaving only the low hum of the empty tracks. She turned, startled, and Caleb said nothing. There was no rational explanation, no camera, no employee, no system, but he knew what had saved her. Later, as he walked the platform alone, Caleb realized the truth. The subway whispered for everyone, yes, but it also remembered. It remembered mistakes, accidents, passengers, and staff. It recorded the smallest errors and intervened quietly, invisibly, like a guardian that no one ever thanked. The city above celebrated Halloween with costumes, candy, and theatrics, but below, the tunnels told their own story. It was not frightening in the traditional sense. It was subtle, patient, and human. The whispers were reminders of care, of attention, of memory. The subway itself had become a legend, one that would linger long after the trains had stopped, after the stations had emptied, and after the last lights flickered off. Caleb stayed late that night, listening. The whispers returned, soft and steady. 12:14 to Central. Do not rush. Keep your balance. He closed his eyes, letting the calm wash over him. Not all urban legends are meant to scare. Some are quiet. Some are patient. Some, like the subway, watch over us while we sleep. Halloween night had settled over the city like a blanket of quiet shadows. Above ground, the streets were alive with celebration. The laughter of children in costumes, the crunch of leaves under hurried feet, the occasional squeal of tires as someone turned too sharply in the dark. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, uneven shadows across the sidewalks, illuminating pumpkin-faced decorations and candles struggling against the wind. Below the surface, in the subway tunnels, the world moved differently. Time seemed slower. The air was thick with the lingering scent of wet concrete, rusted metal, and faint traces of long-forgotten cleaning solutions. Shadows gathered in corners, pooling under broken lights, stretching unnaturally across platforms. The ventilation system hummed steadily, a low, constant pulse that seemed alive, listening, remembering. Caleb walked alone, flashlight in hand, each step measured, deliberate. He had spent weeks documenting the anomalies, noting the whispers, the scraps of paper, the subtle ways the tunnels seemed to guide late-night travelers. The city had become alive to him, not haunted in the traditional sense, but aware, attentive, patient. He had learned to listen to the faint murmurs that no one else seemed to hear. The whisper came again, soft but unmistakable. Step carefully. 12:47 to West End. Do not rush. It was close, intimate, as if the tunnel itself had leaned in to speak. Caleb paused, letting the sound guide him. He moved down a narrow catwalk, over tracks that hummed faintly, past walls streaked with water stains and grime. Each step seemed anticipated, as if the very tunnels knew where he would place his feet, how he would move, and when he might hesitate. He came to a maintenance platform tucked behind an abandoned stairwell, a place he had never noticed before. The area was silent, except for the drip of water from a rusted pipe. There was no scrap of paper, no sign of any human presence. Yet Caleb knew the guidance had come from somewhere patient and deliberate. Then he noticed movement, a faint shadow shifting across the far wall. A figure appeared, almost ethereal in the flashlight's beam. It was a young woman, her head down, headphones in, oblivious to how close she was to the edge of the platform. She moved in perfect rhythm with the voice, each step guided, careful, deliberate. The whisper returned. Step back. Breathe. You are safe now. Caleb felt the weight of the city's memory pressing around him. The tunnels did not merely speak, they acted. They anticipated mistakes, corrected errors, and guided people safely through shadows and danger. The city beneath the streets had grown patient over decades, folding care and attention into its steel and concrete. Over the next few nights, the phenomena intensified. Multiple voices could be heard, sometimes overlapping, issuing instructions in hushed tones. Notes appeared in old cabinets, folded neatly or scrawled with frantic precision. Some were typed, others handwritten, yet all carried the same message: guidance, reassurance, warning. The tunnels themselves seemed to have developed a language of care, layered over decades of human passage. Staff began to understand the pattern. They left small gestures in return: a flashlight slightly tilted to indicate a safe path, a bag of candy tucked into a corner, a folded scrap of paper replaced carefully. The tunnels responded, reinforcing the whispers, issuing warnings and guiding late-night passengers. The city had become a silent guardian, patient, meticulous, and unseen. One night, Caleb observed a young commuter with headphones nearly stepping onto the tracks. The whisper was sharp and insistent. "Step back! Wait for the signal!" The commuter froze, startled. Seconds later, the train slid into the station silently, doors opening perfectly along the platform. The passenger stepped inside, unaware of what had prevented disaster. Caleb stood in the shadows, realizing the full scope of what he was witnessing. The city itself had learned to protect, guide, and remember. The tunnels carried more than instructions. They remembered human behavior. Notes appeared predicting mistakes before they happened. Scraps of paper advised passengers where to step, when to pause, how to navigate platforms safely. The city's memories stretched back decades, folded into the concrete, steel, and hum of the tracks. Staff discovered old recordings, test files from the 1990s, faint voices that matched the whispers they now heard, each labeled simply, "For the ones who ride home late." It became clear that the phenomenon was not limited to schedules or warnings. The city responded to human error, guiding travelers and staff alike. Those who lingered, who walked slowly or hesitated, were guided without even realizing it. Lila, the night cleaner, had once been walking a corridor when the voice called her by name, the same name her grandmother had used to summon her in childhood. "Keep your pace. Transfer at Midtown. Do not hurry," the voice said. She obeyed without thought, moving as if the tunnel had become a conscious extension of her own intuition. When she reached the platform, the words faded. She felt no fear, only the soft reassurance of being watched, guided, remembered. Even more unsettling were the moments when the memory of the city seemed to carry the weight of the past. Victor, another staff member, followed a whisper to a forgotten platform. There, a single pair of small, polished shoes sat neatly on the tile, with faint chalk scrawled above, "Do not forget us." Victor left immediately. The shoes vanished by morning, but the echo of footsteps lingered, a reminder that the tunnels carried not just the living, but the memories of those who had been lost or forgotten. The week before Halloween, the whispers became bolder. They no longer merely issued instructions, they predicted movement, suggested pauses, corrected minor mistakes, and offered reassurance. Passengers noticed subtle coincidences: luggage returned to its owner, misplaced tickets discovered just in time, shadows guiding them safely across platforms. Caleb realized the scale of the city's awareness. It was not merely attentive, it was patient, deliberate, and humane. The whispers were a quiet form of guardianship, built over decades, refined with each passenger and staff member who passed through. The city had learned to watch, remember, and act in ways that no one above ground could perceive. On Halloween night, Caleb stood alone on the East End platform, the last train long gone. The whisper returned, soft and clear. 12:14 to Central. Do not rush. Keep your balance. He listened, letting the words wash over him. The city was alive in its own way, attentive, patient, unceasing. Each instruction, each gentle warning, each careful guidance was part of a larger story, one written over decades of human movement beneath the streets. The train arrived silently. Doors opened and closed with perfect precision. Passengers came and went, unaware of the quiet interventions that kept them safe, guided them through the shadows, and watched over them while the city slept. Caleb lingered, listening to the faint echoes of the whispers. They did not seek recognition or gratitude. They were a patient, deliberate presence, woven into the tunnels themselves, folded into the memory of the city. And though the lights above flickered and the streets buzzed with Halloween revelry, the tunnels beneath remained patient, careful, and human in their own quiet way. He finally ascended the stairwell to the street, the distant lights of the city twinkling above. The whispering followed him softly in memory, fading only as he reached the night air. Above, the streets were alive with celebration. Below, the city continued its silent guardianship, patient and watchful, remembering every step, every hesitation, every traveler who had ever walked its tunnels. The subway whispers would continue, always patient, always deliberate, always human in their own strange, quiet way. Hey, you're still here. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders relax, and notice the quiet around you. Some urban legends aren't about fear, they're about care, attention, and memory that outlasts us all. Some are patient, unseen, guiding us home while the world sleeps. Next, we'll leave the tunnels behind and step into a place you might think you know well. A playground, empty in the October night, where the echoes of children linger and something unseen still rests on the metal. This one's called the Playground Slide. Halloween night leaves a strange quiet in the world after the streets empty and the laughter fades. The city lights flicker unevenly and the wind stirs loose leaves along sidewalks, making them dance like restless shadows. Most people retreat indoors, the warmth of their homes keeping them company. But in a small neighborhood park, under the dull glow of a single flickering street lamp, something else waits. The playground had been abandoned for years. Rust coated the swing chains, paint peeled from the jungle gym, and the slide's metal surface had dulled to a silvery grey, sticky in some places with old rain and sap. Children still passed by in the afternoons, their voices echoing faintly. But after dark, the place belonged to shadows, the wind, and memories that refused to leave. Sophie was walking home from her late shift at the diner. She usually avoided the park at night, but tonight was different. The shortcut through the alley beside it shaved 10 minutes off her route. Her boots crunched over leaves and gravel as she approached, and for a moment she hesitated. The swings swayed gently despite the absence of wind. The slide glimmered under the street lamp, its metal surface catching a pale reflection of the moon. She shook her head, telling herself it was nothing. Old equipment moves, old metal creaks, the wind blows. She passed the swings, eyes fixed forward, and the sound came. A whisper. Soft, like a breath of wind, barely audible, carrying a single, familiar syllable. Sophie. Her heart skipped. She froze, looking around. Empty streets, empty park. Only the leaves rustled, and the faint hum of distant traffic. "Hello," she said, her voice wavering. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a single word followed by a small warning. "Don't climb. Not tonight." Sophie frowned. She glanced at the slide. Its surface seemed ordinary, dull and metallic, but the hairs on her neck stood on end. She stepped back instinctively. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of something she could not identify, sweet, metallic, almost like the faint tang of blood mixed with the aroma of wet leaves. Most rationally, she told herself it was imagination. The park had always been quiet at night. The mind played tricks, shadows moved, but still. She felt a pull, subtle but undeniable, drawing her gaze to the slide. Not in curiosity, but in the sense that it was waiting, as if aware she had come. Sophie continued along the path, trying to ignore it. Her footsteps sounded loud in the silence. Leaves rustled. Somewhere the swing chain squeaked again, lightly, with a rhythm that seemed deliberate. She froze. The whisper returned, now more insistent, yet still soft, almost pleading. "Go back. Leave it alone." Her breath caught. Goosebumps rose along her arms. She took a step backward, but her curiosity, that quiet itch that sometimes defies reason, made her glance toward the slide once more. Shadows clung to it, pooling in unnatural ways, stretching across the metal steps and landing like dark stains. The top platform, small and rusted, seemed to tilt slightly toward her. Sophie's rational mind screamed at her to leave, and yet she saw something. Not movement exactly, but a figure, a child's silhouette, standing at the top of the slide, pale, small, still, almost blending with the shadows. No sound, no wind, nothing but the faintest outline, backlit by the moon. Her heart hammered. "Hello," she whispered again, voice barely audible. The figure did not respond, and then, faintly, a giggle, soft and hollow, carried down the slide, echoing off the nearby walls and trees. Sophie's instincts told her to run. She began walking backward along the path, but the giggle followed, not randomly, but deliberately, seeming to come from the slide itself, from the shadows clinging to it, bending reality around it. Leaves swirled at her feet, swirling in tiny tornadoes, as though some invisible hand was aware of her hesitation. And then she saw them, small footprints along the sand under the slide, child-sized, muddy, wet, but impossibly fresh. She had walked that same path every night for months, alone, and never noticed anything like this. Yet here they were, leading from the jungle gym toward the slide, vanishing at the base. The whisper returned, clearer now, more insistent. "Do not touch. Do not climb. Do not look too closely." Sophie's pulse raced. Every rational thought told her to leave, yet the child figure remained at the top of the slide, pale and still, like it had been waiting for her all night. She took a step back, then another, but the shadows seemed to follow her, creeping along the slide's metal, stretching across the swings, curling along the edges of the jungle gym. She noticed a detail she had not before. The slide had a small scratch along the side, nearly invisible, and within it a series of etched letters. At first glance they seemed random, but as she stepped closer, heart-pounding, she read them. "I'm still here, watching, waiting." The words made her shiver. She realized then that this was not a prank, not graffiti left by children. The letters were too deliberate, too patient, too aware. Someone, or something, had taken the time to leave a message that could only be discovered if someone lingered too long. A sudden noise made her jump, a soft, metallic clang from the top of the slide. The figure had moved, shifting slightly, just enough for her to notice that the shadow at the top was not quite right. The arms hung loosely, too long, too still. No motion, no breathing, but somehow aware of her presence. Sophie wanted to run. Every instinct screamed for her to leave, and yet she was drawn closer, step by step, toward the base of the slide. Her eyes searched the dark, tracing the contours of the figure, the shadows, the sand at her feet. And then the whisper again, now almost a hiss. as if right beside her ear. Climb, if you must, but you will see. Her mind rebelled, but her body hesitated. The playground had grown colder, windless, unnaturally silent, except for the faintest echo of laughter that did not belong to her. She felt the metal steps beneath her fingers, cold and sticky, and realized the surface of the slide was warmer at the top than at the bottom. Not the warmth of sun, but something alive. Sophie's heart pounded as she reached the first step. Another whisper, a near giggle, came from above. "Don't look down. Don't look back." It's too late for that. The steps groaned under her weight, each creak a note in a symphony of warnings. The shadows above twisted and shifted, pooling unnaturally around the figure, which remained just beyond recognition. She felt eyes on her. Too many, unseen, patient, waiting. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint scent again, sweet, metallic, something she could not place. Reaching the top, Sophie froze. The figure was closer now, more distinct. A small child, pale as moonlight, standing still, staring at her with eyes that reflected none of the street lamp's light. The metal surface beneath her felt unnervingly warm, almost pulsing, like a heartbeat. She wanted to step back to run, but her feet refused. The whisper came one final time, slow, deliberate, almost affectionate in its tone. "Do not slide, not tonight, not ever." Sophie stepped back. Her body shook, hands gripping the edges of the slide. The figure remained at the top, motionless, yet somehow alive in its awareness of her. The wind shifted, scattering leaves around her in miniature whirlwinds. The playground seemed to breathe, shadows stretching and curling in ways that made the trees lean in closer. She ran. Down the steps, across the path, past the swings, leaving the park behind. Behind her, the whisper faded, but the memory lingered. The slide stood silent still, waiting for the next person, the next curiosity, the next unsuspecting step. Sophie did not look back. She could not. But she felt the presence of something patient, ancient in its observation, lingering even in the shadows. The playground, abandoned for years, had not forgotten. And it never would. The wind carried a faint giggle to the street, soft, distant, and almost pleased, as if the playground had noted her fear and curiosity in equal measure. Somewhere in the rusted metal, the peeling paint, the shadows pooling in corners, it waited. Waiting for the next night. Waiting for the next Halloween. Waiting for the next person who thought they were alone. And perhaps, she realized as she reached the safety of her own door, some places should never be walked alone after dark. Some shadows are patient. Some warnings are not meant to be ignored. Some stories are written into the metal and concrete, waiting for someone to discover them, too late or just in time. The night deepened and the city above grew quieter, the distant hum of traffic fading to a low, persistent drone. Only the occasional siren or barking dog punctuated the stillness. Sophie's steps had carried her home, but the memory of the playground refused to leave. Every leaf that skittered across the sidewalk, every flicker of shadow under a street lamp, reminded her of the slide, of the figure, of the whispering voice that had guided and warned her. She couldn't sleep. Even in the safety of her apartment, the faint metallic scent and the soft echo of laughter lingered. She found herself retracing every detail, the creak of the steps, the warmth of the slide, the way the shadows pooled unnaturally around the top platform. Rational explanations, wind, imagination, streetlights casting long shadows, could not account for the overwhelming sense that the playground had been alive, aware of her presence, watching, waiting. By the next night, curiosity had drawn her back. She avoided the main path, circling the park carefully, listening for the faintest sound. The swings remained still, the jungle gym silent. Only the slide, dull and metallic under the dim light, seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing beneath the cold metal surface. Sophie stepped closer, heart hammering in her chest. She reached the base of the slide, kneeling to examine the sand beneath. The small footprints were still there, fresh, unweathered by wind or rain. They led from the jungle gym to the slide's base, stopping abruptly. No footprints led away. It was as if the figure had vanished, but the trace remained, a lingering reminder that it had been real. The whisper came again, soft, deliberate, almost patient. Do not climb. Do not touch. Do not linger too long. Her hands trembled as she brushed the sand, half expecting it to shift under her touch. Nothing moved. Still, the air around her felt heavier, charged with an unseen presence. Sophie knew she should leave, yet her curiosity rooted her in place. She had felt the slide's awareness before, and now she wanted to understand it, even as fear curled in her stomach like ice. Slowly, she ascended the steps, one careful step at a time. The metal groaned under her weight, echoing in the silent park. With every step, she felt a strange warmth beneath her palms, a pulsing sensation that was almost alive. She glanced upward toward the top platform. The figure was there again, a small child, pale as moonlight, standing still, eyes reflecting none of the faint streetlight. The figure's gaze seemed to pierce her, aware of her thoughts, measuring her hesitation. Sophie's hands gripped the rails, the whisper now hovering at the edge of her consciousness. Do not slide. Not tonight. Not ever. She froze, unable to move. The wind shifted, carrying the faint metallic scent once more, curling around her, tugging at her senses. The playground seemed to stretch, elongating unnaturally. The swings creaked faintly, though no wind stirred them. Shadows deepened, pooling around the slide, around the figure, crawling slowly across the rusted metal like black ink spreading through water. And then she heard it, a faint giggle, hollow, almost musical, coming from the base of the slide. Not from the figure at the top, but from beneath, as if the slide itself were laughing. Sophie's stomach twisted with fear, but she could not look away. The figure raised one small hand, pointing toward the shadows beneath the slide. Sophie hesitated, heart racing. The whisper returned, almost a hiss now, urgent, patient, impossibly old. Look away. Do not follow. You are not ready. But human curiosity is difficult to restrain. Sophie took a cautious step toward the slide's base, kneeling to peer beneath the metal surface. The shadows were thick, almost tangible, swirling like smoke, yet she could just make out shapes. Tiny hands, small faces, eyes that glimmered faintly, reflecting some inner light. They were impossible to describe, neither fully human nor entirely abstract. They watched her, waiting, aware, patient. A sudden movement made her recoil. A small figure emerged from the shadow, barely taller than a child, translucent but distinctly solid. Its face was pale, features delicate, almost beautiful, but unnervingly still. The eyes were empty, yet somehow filled with memory. Countless Halloweens, countless footsteps, countless moments observed in silence. Sophie stumbled back, gasping. The figure tilted its head, a soft giggle escaping its lips. The whisper, now louder, seemed to resonate from everywhere at once. Do not climb, do not touch, do not linger, or you will see. The air grew colder. The metallic scent sharpened, almost acidic, clinging to her skin. Leaves swirled around her in tiny whirlwinds, yet the playground itself remained still, suspended in some unnatural time. The swings, jungle gym, Even the faint outline of the park fence seemed to bend slightly, as if leaning toward her, observing. Sophie wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted. The figure advanced slowly, gliding rather than walking, descending toward the base of the slide. It moved without sound, leaving the shadows behind as if they were part of its body. The whisper continued, patient, insistent, urgent. Do not see by do not follow. You cannot undo what you find. Her eyes fell to the sand beneath her feet. More footprints had appeared, smaller than the first set, delicate, precise. They led toward the slide's ladder, then around the platform, then vanished. She realized they were not made by the figure above, but by something else unseen guiding its presence. The figure paused at the base, tilting its head, studying her. It did not speak in words. Instead, Sophie felt a wave of memory wash over her. Fleeting images, moments she did not recognize, but that felt familiar. Laughter echoing through dark playgrounds, tiny hands gripping metal rails, whispers that warned, that guided, that waited. A sensation of being observed and measured, weighed and remembered, pressed against her mind. Sophie's own memories seemed to merge with the figure's presence. She saw herself as a child, reaching for the slide's railing in a long-forgotten park, almost losing her balance. She felt the same patient, deliberate guidance now present in the shadows. The playground had remembered her, kept track, preserved fragments of her life, folded them into its own awareness. And then the figure moved again, gliding backward toward the shadows beneath the slide. The whisper softened, patient now, almost comforting. Leave. For now. But remember. Sophie stumbled back, adrenaline surging. She fled the playground entirely, boots crunching over leaves, lungs burning with each breath. Behind her, the figure had vanished, shadows settling into stillness. The slide, rusted and dull, seemed once again just a piece of metal in the moonlight, but she knew better. She had seen its awareness, its patience, its memory. By the time she reached the safety of the street, the wind carried only the faintest echo of giggles, soft and distant, and the metallic scent had faded. Her hands shook, her chest heaving. She tried to convince herself it had been imagination. The mind plays tricks. Streetlights bend shadows. The wind carries sounds. But she knew the truth. The playground remembered. It waited, and it observed, patiently. For the next nights, Sophie avoided the shortcut. She walked the longer path, still thinking of the slide, still haunted by the whispers. Leaves would rustle in the empty park. Shadows pooled beneath the rusted metal. Sometimes, if she walked past late enough, she thought she heard the faint giggle, patient, waiting, reminding her of something she could not fully name. The playground had become more than a place. It was a presence, a memory, a guardian of something she might never understand fully. The slide itself had absorbed decades of children's steps, of forgotten games, of laughter and fear. Every scraped knee, every lost glove, every forgotten toy had been recorded, stored, remembered, folded into the metal, the sand, the shadows. And now, somehow, it had become aware. Sophie's experience was just the beginning. Others, if they dared, might notice it too. A child left alone after dark. A night wanderer passing through. A curious teenager seeking shortcuts. The playground would remember them, whisper to them, guide them, or warn them. Perhaps if they lingered too long, it might demand more than just attention. And for Sophie, the memory lingered long after she reached home. She could not erase the feeling of being observed, of being measured, of being remembered. Every gust of wind through the city streets, every shadow across the sidewalk, carried the faintest echo of the slide, of the whispers, of the patient presence that had followed her from the park. Some places should never be walked alone after dark. Some shadows are patient. Some warnings are not meant to be ignored. And some stories are written not just in memory, but in metal, sand, and shadow, waiting for the next person to discover them. The nights that followed were colder, darker, and quieter. Even the city above seemed subdued, as though holding its breath in reverence or fear of what lurked beneath the surface of familiar streets. Sophie could not shake the memory of the slide, of the figure she had seen, of the whispers that had warned and guided her. Each time she closed her eyes, she imagined the rusted metal, the small footprints, and the faint, patient giggle that seemed to cling to the park like a shadow she could never shake. Curiosity had returned, stronger than caution. Sophie found herself walking back to the park late one evening, the city streets unusually empty, leaves swirling under her boots. Her breath rose in soft clouds in the chill air, and the faint metallic scent carried on the wind, guiding her forward with a strange insistence. The street lamp flickered over the playground, casting long shadows that pooled and stretched unnaturally, like ink spilling over the edges of the world. She paused at the gate, hesitant. The park was silent. The swings hung motionless, the jungle gym sagged under the weight of rust, and the slide, pale and metallic, gleamed faintly under the lamplight. But she could feel it, the awareness she had felt before, patient and deliberate, waiting. She stepped forward, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet loud in the eerie stillness. The whispers returned, soft, deliberate, almost seductive in their persistence. "Do not climb, not yet." "But stay." Sophie's pulse quickened, her hands shook as she approached the base of the slide. The small footprints were still there, etched in the sand as though pressed by invisible feet, leading from the jungle gym to the slide and stopping abruptly at its base. No footprints led away. The figure had vanished again, but its presence lingered, patient and waiting, a quiet weight pressing at the edges of her perception. She hesitated, glancing at the steps. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet she felt drawn upward, compelled by something she could not name. Carefully, she placed one foot on the first step, then another. The metal groaned softly beneath her weight, a low, almost musical creak that seemed to echo through the empty park. Shadows shifted around her, curling along the rails, pooling under the platform. At the top, the figure was there again. The child's silhouette, pale as moonlight, stood perfectly still, backlit by the faint glow of the street lamp. Its eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to contain memories of countless Halloweens, countless footsteps, countless moments observed in silence. Sophie's breath caught. She could feel its gaze, patient, deliberate, measuring her hesitation, assessing her curiosity, weighing her resolve. The whispers intensified, surrounding her, pressing against her mind. "Do not slide. Not tonight. Not ever. Look carefully. Watch. Remember." Sophie's hands gripped the rails. The metal was warmer than before, pulsing faintly under her fingers, as if alive. She glanced down at the slide's surface. Shadows pooled unnaturally, darkening the smooth metal, and she noticed faint etchings along its sides. Letters, symbols, words, fragments of warnings, messages, remnants of something patient and enduring. She could not decipher them fully, but she felt the weight of their meaning pressing against her consciousness. Do not disturb. Do not awaken. Do not linger. And then she heard it. A soft, hollow giggle carried through the windless park, coming from beneath the slide, echoing off the rusted metal, as if the playground itself were alive. Her stomach twisted. The figure moved slightly, gliding rather than walking, descending toward the base, shadows trailing, merging with the darkness around it. Sophie's pulse raced. Her rational mind scrambled for explanations, wind, tricks of the light, street lamps flickering. But every instinct told her this was something else entirely, something patient, something aware, something that had watched, remembered, and waited for years. The whispers shifted in tone, almost melodic, weaving through the silence. You cannot leave. Not yet. See the past. See the steps you never noticed. Sophie froze. She glanced down at the sand beneath the slide. New footprints had appeared, smaller than before, precise, delicate. They led from the jungle gym to the ladder, then disappeared. She realized they were not made by the figure above, but by something unseen, guiding its presence, weaving a silent path for her to follow. Compelled, she knelt, brushing the sand carefully with her fingertips. The grains were cold, but the impressions were distinct, almost alive, like they had been pressed by a hand aware of her presence. She could feel the echoes of children who had played there. Long ago, their memories absorbed into the metal and sand, folding over years of footsteps, laughter, and fear. The figure began to ascend the slide's platform again. Sophie could see it more clearly now. Its features were delicate, ethereal, almost beautiful, but impossibly still. Its eyes reflected nothing of the street lamp's glow, yet seemed to hold the collective memory of every child who had ever played here. The whispers rose again, insistent, surrounding her. Do not slide, not tonight, or you will know what we remember. A sudden movement made her gasp. The figure tilted its head, studying her, its gaze heavy with expectation. She felt a wave of memory wash over her, not her own, but fragments of past Halloweens, moments forgotten or overlooked, small injuries, lost toys, whispers, laughter, and shadows folding across the playground. She realized the playground had remembered. Every step, every slip, every frightened glance, recorded, observed, preserved. Sophie's breath caught. She wanted to flee, but her body remained rooted, curiosity mingling with fear. The figure descended slightly, sliding a hand along the railing, and the whispering became urgent, almost commanding. Do not see. Do not follow. You cannot unsee what we hold. The metal beneath her pulsed again. She shivered. The slide seemed alive, its surface vibrating faintly under her fingers, and the shadows thickened, pooling at the base, curling along the rusted steps, twisting in ways that made the trees bend inward. She could hear faint giggles, many voices now, echoing softly, blending together, patient, aware, almost pleased at her presence. And then the whisper became a single word, low and deliberate, vibrating through her mind. Remember. Sophie's heart raced. She felt the weight of decades pressed against her consciousness. The playground had absorbed every child's steps, every forgotten glove, every scraped knee. It had watched silently as they laughed, fell, cried, and left. And now it was aware of her, observing, waiting, measuring. Her hands gripped the rails, knuckles white. The figure moved closer, gliding down toward the base. The whispers filled the air, surrounding her, pressing against her ears and mind. You are here. We know, you see. You. Sophie wanted to close her eyes, to shut out the presence, but she could not. The air itself felt alive, charged with unseen attention. The playground had become a living memory, a guardian of past Halloweens, a witness to countless moments now folded into its metal, sand, and shadows. The figure paused at the base, tilting its head, silent, yet commanding. Sophie felt an almost affectionate, patient awareness emanate from it, as if the playground itself were acknowledging her fear, curiosity, and respect. The whispers softened, shifting from warnings to gentle guidance. Leave. For now. But remember, we wait. Always. Sophie stumbled back, adrenaline surging, heart hammering. She ran, leaving the park behind, boots crunching over leaves, lungs burning. Behind her, the figure vanished, the shadows settling into stillness. The slide, rusted and dull, seemed ordinary again, but she knew it was not. It had remembered her. It had observed her. It had waited for her to see, to acknowledge it. By the time she reached the street, the wind carried only the faintest echo of giggles, soft and distant. The metallic scent had faded, leaving her with the memory of awareness, patience, and something alive in the shadows. Sophie could not explain what she had seen. Rational thought failed her entirely. But she knew one thing the playground had remembered. It had watched, and it had waited. Somewhere beneath the cold metal, peeling paint, and rusted rails, the memories of countless children and forgotten moments persisted. The slide, the swings, the jungle gym, all patient, all aware, all recording. And some night, when the city slept, it would whisper again, waiting for the next person curious or foolish enough to wander into its shadows. Sophie did not return to the shortcut again. She walked the long way home, ears straining for the faintest giggle, the softest whisper. She could feel the playground's presence following her, patient, deliberate, and human in its strange, quiet way. And as she lay awake that night, she understood that some places are alive, not in the sense of motion, but in memory. Patient, observing, waiting. Some warnings are not meant to be ignored. Some stories are written in metal, sand and shadow, waiting for those who might discover them. Even now, far from the park, the memory lingers. The slide remains patient and aware, waiting. Waiting for the next visitor, the next curiosity, the next set of footsteps to fold into its eternal memory. Halloween night had reached its deepest, stillest hour. The streets above were nearly empty, faint orange glows from distant streetlights flickering across wet pavements. The city had gone quiet, except for the occasional hum of a distant car engine, the whisper of leaves stirred by a soft, chilling breeze. But in the small neighborhood park, the playground stood unchanged, patient, aware, waiting. Sophie's footsteps echoed softly as she approached, drawn by the pull she had tried so hard to ignore. She knew the shortcut she once feared, yet the pull of curiosity was stronger than caution. The slide waited for her, dull, rusted, metallic, yet alive in a way she could feel in her bones. Shadows clung to it like ink, spreading across the jungle gym, pooling under the swings, curling around the metal posts as if the playground itself were breathing. Her hands trembled as she touched the rail of the slide. The metal was warm, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. The small footprints in the sand at its base were fresh again, leading from the jungle gym to the ladder, then stopping abruptly. She followed them instinctively, drawn by the patient presence she could no longer deny. The figure appeared at the top, pale as moonlight, small and impossibly still. Its dark, hollow eyes reflected none of the street lamp's glow, yet held the weight of countless memories. Children playing, falling, laughing, crying, forgotten toys left behind, scraped knees, whispered secrets, and long abandoned games. It was patient, deliberate, aware of every step Sophie took. The whispers returned, surrounding her from all directions, pressing against her mind in gentle, insistent waves. Do not slide, not tonight. You are not ready. Do not linger too long. Sophie's pulse raced. Fear clawed at her chest, but curiosity rooted her in place. Her hands gripped the rail tightly. The figure tilted its head, almost imperceptibly, studying her. Shadows thickened at the base, crawling along the steps, pooling in unnatural ways. The slide itself seemed alive, vibrating faintly beneath her palms, its surface warm and responsive. The air around her carried the metallic scent she had first noticed, sweet, sharp, almost blood-like. Leaves swirled in tiny tornadoes at her feet, lifted by no wind. The playground seemed aware of her hesitation, observing, waiting. And then she felt it, the weight of countless Halloweens folded into the metal, sand and shadow. Each child who had climbed, slid or played here had left an imprint, a memory, a trace. And now the playground remembered her. The figure began to descend the platform, gliding rather than walking, shadows trailing and merging with the dark. Its presence was patient, deliberate, yet there was an almost affectionate quality to its awareness, as though it understood her fear, her curiosity, her reverence. The whispers intensified, filling the park, echoing off rusted metal, hollow, almost melodic. "You are here, we know. You see? Do not leave. Do not turn away, remember." Sophie's breath came in shallow gasps. The figure stopped at the base, tilting its head, eyes empty, yet filled with memory. She could feel decades of footsteps, laughter, secrets, and shadows pressing against her mind. Each whisper, each creak of metal, each faint giggle was part of the playground itself, patient and aware, recording every detail. Her hands shook. She wanted to run, but her curiosity anchored her. The whispers softened, turning gentle, almost coaxing. "See what we have remembered. Feel what we hold. Leave only when you understand." Sophie glanced at the slide's surface. Etched along its sides were letters and symbols she had not noticed before, faint scratches forming words she could barely read. "We wait. We remember. We never forget." A shiver ran down her spine. The playground was alive in memory, observation, awareness. It had preserved every step, every game, every small joy and fear, folding them into its being. The figure moved closer, gliding over the sand. Sophie could see the faint glimmer of tiny, spectral faces beneath the shadows, children who had passed through the playground, their memories absorbed into the metal and sand. Each face was patient, aware, watching, waiting for her to acknowledge them. The whispers became a chorus, soft and insistent, echoing around her. "Do not climb, do not touch, do not slide. We have waited, we have remembered, we see you." Sophie felt a pressure in her chest, as if the playground itself were reaching for her attention. She could almost hear the creak of old swings, the faint rattle of chains, the echoes of long-forgotten laughter. Her mind swam with a memory, not just her own, but of countless others who had left traces here. The playground had grown aware over time, patient, observing, protective, yet insistent. A sudden gust lifted leaves into miniature whirlwinds. The figure glided closer still, stopping just short of her. It raised a small hand, pointing toward the slide. The whispers softened, patient, almost affectionate. "Slide, if you must. But see, remember, respect." Sophie's heart hammered. She knew she could slide down, but the metal beneath her hands felt alive, pulsing with memory, with awareness. She realized the playground had not only watched her, it had guided her, warned her, tested her patience. She had been observed with care, deliberately, as if the playground itself judged her readiness. Steeling herself, she slowly descended the slide. The metal was warmer than she expected, almost soft under her palms. Shadows clung to the edges, curling, pooling, forming shapes she could not fully comprehend. The whispers surrounded her. "Do not fear. Remember, leave with understanding. Respect what we hold." Sophie reached the bottom, stepping onto the sand. The small footprints appeared again, leading from the base of the slide around the jungle gym, then vanished. The figure remained at the top, still, silent, watching. The whispers faded slowly, leaving only the faintest echo of laughter, patient and deliberate. She turned and left the playground, boots crunching over leaves, heart racing, mind awash with memory and fear. The slide remained behind her, dull and metallic, rusted yet alive in a way she could feel even from a distance. The shadows pooled, the swings hung motionless, the jungle gym sagged under its own weight. But she knew better. The playground had remembered her. It had observed her. It had waited. By the time she reached her street, the metallic scent had faded, leaving only the memory of awareness, patience, and something alive in the shadows. She did not look back. She did not need to. The playground was patient. It was deliberate. It remembered, and it waited for the next person who might wander too close, too curious, too unprepared. Even now she could feel it, lingering at the edges of her consciousness. The slide, the swings, the jungle gym, patient, observing, recording. Some places are alive not because they move, but because they remember. They see, they wait, they warn. And some warnings are not meant to be ignored. Sophie understood that now. The playground, abandoned and rusted, had grown sentient through memory and observation, folding decades of children's steps, games, laughter, and fear into its being. And on this Halloween night, it had acknowledged her presence, her curiosity, and her respect. She had survived, she had learned. And the playground remained, waiting, patient, and eternal. Hey, you've walked through shadows with me tonight. 3 disturbing urban legends, each patient, deliberate, and quietly human in their own strange way. The library basement, where silence holds more than books. The subway whisper, echoing beneath the city, unseen yet aware. And the playground slide, a place that remembers every step, every whisper, every hesitant hand on cold metal. These stories aren't just about fear, they're about memory, curiosity, and the spaces that hold us long after we leave. And Halloween, well, it makes those spaces feel closer, waiting just beyond the edge of our sight. So before you drift off, remember to check your surroundings, listen for whispers in the wind, and respect the places that watch quietly. Some shadows are patient. Some stories remember you, far longer than you remember them. Take a slow breath. Relax. Let the night hold you. And when this video ends, if you feel a little braver or a little wiser, tap subscribe and the bell so the next story finds you where you are. Then, in the comments, share which story stayed with you tonight. I'd love to know. Sleep safely, but remember, some playgrounds, some basements, and some subways are always awake.